Hello, welcome to Insider Exec Secrets. My name's Estelle Reid, executive coach, trainer and author at B. I work with busy leaders and entrepreneurs to optimise their productivity, success and well-being so that they lead their very best business life. You're going to hear from execs who bear all and share their insider secrets along with my episodes aimed at optimising your productivity, success and well-being. This includes inner fears, stresses and doubts, how adversity can drive your success, but also be a tipping point. We're also going to hear about those exec nuggets of genius and experience and learnings. And my aim is that we get to the source and the source fast, and I'll explain what that means in a bit. But my intention is that you realise you're normal. I am privileged to hear all sorts of different stories and you all say the same things. And so my aim is to share these stories with you and to share strategies that will enhance your success. So without further ado, if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see that I've got a gentleman sat next to me. And you might be thinking, well, they're not social distancing. And I will reveal all in a moment. But this is Michael Reid. He's a plant manager at Fresenius Medical Care. Now, I have known Mr. Reid for 25 years because he was my boss and he is now my husband. Now, there's a reason I wanted to interview Mike, and that's because he's got a reputation for delivering some big results. So this is one challenge that he was set. He had to cut his workforce by 2/3 and then increase productivity by 1/3. Completely nailed it. He also, the other challenge he was faced with in the business he's working for at the minute, when he joined, it was the worst performing factory in Europe. Again, he's turned that around and it's one of the best performing factories in Europe. So he delivers results. And the other reason I wanted to interview him is that he's actually my hero, and he's my hero for a number of reasons. One, obviously, you're my rock. But from a leadership perspective, whenever I'm coaching my clients, I often have Mike on a pedestal, and I'm thinking about Mike in terms of the way that he led that team 25 years ago. And when we were working together, I was a lowly HR assistant. Mike was the general manager. And I can honestly say he was the first person in my life that really made me believe in myself. And that was because he would trust me to get on with things, and he would give me responsibility that was way above my level of pay grade, effectively. So I felt trusted, but he has this uncanny ability to deal with challenging situations. And I remember being in a leadership team meeting, and he said to the team, I was filling in for my HR manager boss at the time, and he said, we've got something heading towards us, and that's digital photography. You know, we will eventually go out of business because photography film will be no more. And I can remember sat there thinking, what is this man on about? But again, that's one of Mike's strengths, is that he's always ahead of the curve. He's innovative. And even when he's got difficult news to deliver, he somehow manages to rouse the troops, get you on side, and that's because he's always got a plan to deal with the problem that the organisation is facing. So whilst he works for an organisation, the other reason I wanted to interview him is that not only is he an amazing leader, but he's also got a real entrepreneurial spirit. So that's why I thought it was appropriate for this podcast. So what I wanted to do with this podcast is, I sometimes when I listen to podcasts, there's a long, boring CV of an individual, and you know, the guest will go through every single job, and it tends to be a bit boring and I switch off. probably because I've got a short span of attention. So I wanted to do my guest biogs a little bit different, and I wanted to get to the source. So the source being the interesting bits, and the source being what created those interesting bits, usually in childhood, fairly quickly. So to begin with, Mike, husband.
Okay. Yes, wifey.
I wondered if you could start by describing what a brilliant day is in your current role. So what's that for you?
Okay, well, my role is essentially manufacturing. That's where my core abilities lie, I think, and my enjoyment lies. And to talk about a great day, I think a period in time, if I take a recent example, the beginning of last year, as a factory, we decided that we needed to up the ante on our quality performance. So we've had over the last few years, certainly 5 years or so, very good performance in terms of the products in the market with very low error rates. So I'm talking about 1 in a million sort of quality defects in the marketplace. So we decided to get even better. We had to look at the internal processes in our manufacturing plant to make sure there were no errors, because obviously if you have an error, you can avoid it by quality control, and that gives you some scrap or some waste or some rework, which costs money and time. So the perfect factory would be one that never has any errors. So we set on a program we call Zero Defects. This has been supported by my boss. It's a philosophy that we're driving throughout Europe within our corporation. So we had to embrace it for our plant. And a great day for me this year was when we'd set a target for this year in different parts of the factory, different production lines, of getting to less than 1,000 internal defects per million. And we were running last year at about 1,500 or 1,600. So that's, reducing it by a third. That's a fairly ambitious improvement target. And in March, at the end of March, we looked at the defect rates on one of our production lines, and they'd gotten it down to 5 defects per million. Now, to put that in perspective, that means a right first time, if people are used to that, of 99.995% right first time, which is pretty incredible.
Flipping heck.
This is on a production line that's essentially doesn't have a manager or a supervisor. It's run by a team. They're self-managed. We set the targets and help them solve some of the problems, but it's down to them to deliver it. And they delivered that performance whilst also hitting record daily outputs. And that was, to me, the kind of thing I look for and gives me a great deal of satisfaction. It's an achievement and seeing those guys perform so well.
What can I ask? So to be able to deliver that, I know you're saying it's self-managed teams, and that's been part of your track record in the past. That's one of the things that you do. And again, it's that devolving responsibility to the team, which again, I think makes you a strong leader. What top 3 strengths of yours do you think are helping to deliver those kinds of results?
Well, one is that I would take overall responsibility. So even though it's not me that's doing it, I sort of will always set out that ultimately it's my responsibility. So if those guys fail, then I'm doing something wrong. They don't get the result. I haven't created the right climate. I haven't trained them properly. I haven't given them the right equipment. So if I set out by taking that responsibility, I always feel responsible. So I think that's a strength, and that helps people because they think they can be a bit more free to perform, because they think, well, if we get it wrong, this guy's taking that ownership and responsibility. If he's driving us to that and it doesn't work out, then it's not our fault. It's his fault. So I think that's one of my key strengths. Another one is I'm generally pretty good at simplifying things for people. So if it's a complicated issue or it looks difficult or the challenge looks daunting, I'm pretty good at distilling that down and expressing it in straightforward ways that people can understand. I mean, our guys on the shop floor are not qualified people. They're experienced operators, but they don't have any formal qualifications or training or what have you. They've got a lot of experience and they've got a very good attitude. So with that, you have to be able to communicate with them in ways that make sense for them in their world. So I think that's something that is another strength. And I guess the final strength is being able to focus on key issues and not get distracted, and keep that focus on the right thing at the right time. So the work we've been doing this last year or so on the line could have been done 2 or 3 years ago, but it wouldn't have made any sense because we had much bigger problems. We had to solve them first before we could move to the current thing. So I think the issue is, don't try and fix everything all at once. Focus on what's right for now and then move on, but keep moving it, keep improving it.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip actually. And in fact, it's been something I've been talking about on a vlog today, is, you know, because sometimes we can get stuck, can't we? And not keep moving things.
Absolutely.
And
you could easily sit there and say, well, we're getting a pretty good result, so we don't need to do any more than that. We'll just hold it firm, make sure it doesn't fall over. And that's what a lot of people do. But then what happens is the world moves on and you get left behind. So you've got to keep saying, well, how can we keep moving forward? But in a way that, you know, what are you ultimately trying to do? For us, it's a fairly simple mission. We have patients that use our products at the end of the line. We need to keep them safe. We need to give them the best possible experience in using our products. And then we need to do it cost effectively because we're supplying the health service. So it's a very simple story that we need the best possible products at the lowest possible cost. And anything we do is driven by being able to achieve that.
Cool. So we've done strengths, you know, the flip side, don't you? So what would you say your biggest weakness is?
I think I've got a number, but I think the biggest ones are probably impatience. I don't like things taking forever. I want to get things moving quickly. So sometimes I'll dive in rather than, I don't overanalyze, but sometimes perhaps don't analyze enough. So I have to check that sometimes. So that's one of them for sure. I think another one is probably my bluntness and directness can sometimes upset people. I don't suffer fools gladly, but equally, you know, I like to tell it as it is, and some people don't like that. They like the pill to be sugar coated, and mine often isn't. Although it does the job, it may not have the sugar coating.
So moving on now, so we're going to get into the sauce. I wondered if you could tell me what early life experiences helped you to develop your number one strength. Which is your number one strength, do you think?
That's a good question. I think it's probably the ability to simplify and focus combined. It's that ability to look through something that's quite complex and try and make it simple and understandable.
You'll laugh, listeners. When there's something complex, like for example my pension statement, I'll say, yeah, can you read that for me and just give me the summary? So yes, you are very good at that. So what was the early childhood experience that helped you to develop that strength?
That's a difficult one to answer, but the only thing I can think of is when I was at school, certainly at secondary school, when I started to perhaps get good at schoolwork. Prior to that, I'd only been average, but I found I was naturally very good at science, particularly. And as my sister was growing up, my sister's 3 years younger than me, she got to secondary school, she was struggling a bit, but she was at that age where we went to parents for help and it was beyond their ken, and they'd had limited formal education, so it came to me to help her out. And I think that in sort of trying to help her and finding ways that what for me was very obvious that I could see struggling with is perhaps where I learned some of those skills. Yeah,
cool. So I'm always fascinated by people's mission and purpose in life. So mine is bringing out brilliance. It's in my strapline, and you know, I've bored people to death over where that comes from in the past. So what's your kind of work-based mission or purpose, and then where does that come from?
I think in my current role now, it's to leave a legacy of manufacturing that's excellent. The UK manufacturing industry has been devastated since I started out. You know, when I left university and went into manufacturing, a lot of my colleagues were saying, you know, why are you going into manufacturing? It's dying out. You want to go into banking or accounting and those kinds of things. And it has been a steady decline since then, but there are some very good examples of excellence within manufacturing in the UK, and we have a long, strong history in it. So I'd like to leave that legacy of a strong manufacturing unit behind. And I've seen factories closed. I've worked at factories in my career that no longer exist. So that's important to me. And the other thing that is important, we've already touched on, is always making things better than I found them. So if I can walk away and something is left in a better condition and performing better, then that gives me a...
So where does that come from?
Where does that come from? That's a good question.
So, for example, so I like to bring out brilliance because I really wasn't brilliant at school. But I believe that I think everybody has the potential to be brilliant. So where do you think your mission and purpose comes from?
I think probably, and it's similar in the sense that I want people to do well, and I like to develop staff and build teams that can achieve great things. And I think a lot of that came from when I went through education. This is going back to the 70s. I mean, education and schools weren't what they are now. And I know that because I have a direct comparison with our daughter Daisy when I look at the school and how fantastic they are compared to when we were there. And you were judged very early on at schools in those days and boxed in and pigeonholed. And there were a lot of people, I think, that could have done much better in their lives if the schools had supported and developed them. So I think that drove a lot of it. I could see it. I was lucky because I could do schooling, and where the teaching was poor, I could go in the library, read something and understand it. But a lot of people didn't have that. They needed some support, and oftentimes it wasn't there. So it maybe stems from that.
Yeah, cool. So one of the traits I've noticed with all my execs, leaders, is that there's some form of adversity that has driven them on. And I have heard some really harrowing stories, but also some really amazing stories. And you think, blimey, O'Reilly, that I can see how that adversity has driven them on and created a certain level of success. So what adversity has driven your success?
I wouldn't say I had any real strong adversity. I had a reasonably easy life. But there have always been challenges in there. I don't know, I, for some reason at a young age, I always had a sense of fairness and things having, seeing things that weren't fair and experiencing that myself at school. I could give a simple example. As I said before, I was always very good at science, but I can remember pre-O-level year, so I'm showing my age now, but pre-O-level year, I got demoted into the second tier in physics. The teacher said, "Oh no," I said, "It can't be right because my exam mark was like third in the year." Yeah. And he said, "Oh yeah, but it's on your schoolwork as well, and I don't think you're ever going to pass an O-level, so we put you in the second tier." And I protested. I even asked to see the head, and no one wanted to listen. And that was a big, strong sense of injustice for me. And in the end, I discussed it with my parents, well, my mum particularly. My mum actually wrote to the school and said, "Look, what's going on? This doesn't make sense." And then they put me back in the upper tier. So yeah, she was very tenacious in that. She didn't understand, and she didn't really know how good or bad I was because she didn't understand physics, but she trusted me, and that was important. Incidentally, I later went on and got the best possible grade at A-level in physics, so yeah, that proved me right. So I think that kind of sense of injustice and wanting to do something about it and seeing it all around, and feeling it, what it felt like for myself, was the only kind of real adverse thing I could come up with.
It's, I've heard so many sometimes tragic teacher-pupil stories, where teachers have, and I do think teachers have a tough job because, it's like being parent for lots of children, for a long period of time. And so I get that it's tough. And sometimes what happens to kids at school through teachers is absolutely appalling. And I can remember, Mr. Gibson, if you're listening, you said I wouldn't amount to anything. Thank you. That was the biggest kick up the rear. And it's interesting how some of these things, they can drive people on. So somebody says something like that, and my view on that is, I'm going to do it under the table. I do two fingers like, screw you, I'll prove you differently. And I think that's what happened.
I would prove them I could do it, and it spurred me on to show that I was able, because I believed that I was.
One of the things when I'm working with my clients is that it's great that kick up the bum kind of makes people go, screw you, and they work really hard. But again, when I'm working with my clients, I find that they get to this tipping point where they overdo whatever it is that they're doing. And, they end up, sat in that chair over there, stressed. Not that they would ever use the word stress, because that's not really in their nature, but I can see the stressed. They're working longer hours, they withdraw, they've got health issues, they're less patient. So there are clues that they are at a tipping point, and they know that something in work and life often has to change in order to bring some balance back. So how do you know when you're close to your tipping point?
I think...
And what are the signs?
Yeah, the signs would be certainly working too long hours, but I think you would know it. The signs are that I become incommunicative. Sort of, I go into my own head.
I knock on the cave. I'll say, woo, are you in there?
If I'm dealing with what seems like an intractable problem, there's a lot of pressure going on at work, and it doesn't happen so much nowadays, but we've had periods in the past where we've been running major change programs in a much bigger role, where long hours and being in my own little place and incommunicative have been certainly the signs. I'm probably also not sleeping well enough and sort of feeling sluggish and all that kind of thing.
And so what tools, techniques, strategies do you use to get yourself back into balance then?
Well, really, for me, it's about perspective. It's reminding myself that whatever I do in a job, at the end of the day, when I'm long gone, those problems will still be around and challenges will be still there. The organisation will still go on.
So is that like perspective taking?
So it's a perspective. It's not letting it become all consuming, because it's not the only thing that's important, and you have to remind yourself sometimes. And also, it's kind of our world problem. When you look at people whose biggest problem is where the next meal comes from or getting shelter over their head, then you think, well, actually, it's not really such a big deal whether I finish this project a month late or 2 months late. You sometimes have to remind yourself of that, get that real perspective about what's going on in the world, and then say, okay, let's just calm it down a bit and refocus.
So what else do you do? What other technique? Because listeners, he's a right chilled out dude at home. He is the calm in any storm, and I know I can make a guess as to the tools that he uses, but how do you stay calm? How do you relax? How do you unwind?
I think the most important technique for me, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do it, is compartmentalisation. So I'm able to put work in a box and separate it from other aspects of my life. So and you'll remember, it doesn't happen so much these days, but in times gone by when I had to work long hours, I wouldn't bring work home. I would stay in the office till it was done and then come home. And that gives you a natural break to say, okay, I'm now at home. So I very rarely work from home now. I have done recently over the COVID crisis, where we've had crisis meetings every morning at such an early time that it made sense to do it from home rather than get into the office for a 7 o'clock meeting. But generally, it's that segregation, and then it's being able to do things that help my mind switch off. And for me, there are a number of things. There are 3 important things within that. One is music, losing myself in music. The second one is reading, because I read a lot, but I don't read so much in terms of theory nowadays. I used to when I was younger, but now it's escapism, so it's novels, usually thrillers, crime novels, that kind of thing. And I think the third aspect is family time, getting out with the dogs or spending time on the boat, or just those kind of getting away from it, taking regular holidays is also very important. So you switch off and
yeah, been a bit difficult, hasn't it, lately, folks? Great, cool. So we're going to move on to the fears, stresses, doubts section of the interview. So I'm going to get you to pick one, and I want to know about it. So, and the reason I've picked these is that, again, you know, often my execs will come all macho to the session, and they'll know they need to see me, but they're not entirely sure sometimes, and I have to go digging to find out why. And again, they don't tend to use certain types of language, but this is what we're talking about. So so I want an example at work where, so at work, what causes you to experience either anger, fear, stress, anxiety, depression, self-doubt, overthinking?
Well, let's talk about stress, because I think most of the others probably nowadays not so much stress, but there is one thing I know through my career that causes me stress, and that manifested in a very big way a number of years ago. In fact, just before I started my current job, and that is not being able to have a say.
Yes.
So, you know, not having a voice, just being ignored, and I think for me that probably relates back to the story I was talking about of the physics example at school, where no one, I knew I was right, but I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was a kid at a very ordinary comprehensive school that no one wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
And the figures of authority didn't. And so if I feel that no one's listening and I don't have a say or chance to do my thing or make an impact, then it becomes stressful.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So again, when I'm working with my execs, they often have one limiting belief that everything boils down to, but we might talk about branches of those limiting beliefs. And to reassure you, everybody has limiting beliefs. It's just whether they are consciously aware of them. So it could be something like a fear of failure, a fear of rejection. It could be just feeling like you're not enough, not good enough, not intelligent enough. You know, there's all sorts of different ones. And so which limiting belief have you had to overcome or have overcome through your work, would you say?
I think the fear of not being good enough. That was certainly with me through my early schooling. You know, it's my parents must have wanted me to do really well. You know, they didn't come from families that were highly educated, so that it was important for them. But in those days, you know, you get your report and you were compared to other kids in the street, and you know,
in the street, what your reports were compared.
Oh yeah, the guy across the road's done better than in English than you have. Why is that? You know, and all that kind of thing. So
no data privacy then.
Oh no, unless there's and so it became and schooling in certainly pre-secondary school, it was done by fear. You know, it was recite your times tables, and if you didn't get it right, you got a whack round the ear. You know, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of fear, and you know, it's sort of trying to escape that, because it's not conducive to learning. I mean, I was worse with a strict teacher than I was with an encouraging teacher. So I can remember what was the primary school, the first year I had a very good supportive teacher, and I did pretty well. And then the next year it was a very strict disciplinarian teacher who had a strap that he wasn't afraid to use.
A strap?
If you got things wrong, and my results went down because I was in fear. So, and
I've heard that so many times. You know, I've heard some really harrowing stories. Thank goodness the education system has changed.
Absolutely, it's moved on a bit since those days.
So we're going to move on now to exec nuggets of genius, experience and learnings. And you know, you've been my best mentor stroke leader. So who's yours been?
Probably the first job I had, the MD of the place. I worked for an independent factory which was owned by three shareholding companies, and it had an MD locally. It had the sort of overriding casting vote. And when I started out in sort of my early 20s, as a young trainee, and I worked in the lab and on the factory floor. He was at that stage in his mid-50s, and he was a very well-educated guy, very bright guy, and he was a very paternalistic manager. So he was slightly feared because that was the culture in those days. Bear in mind, this is 1981, 82.
Yeah.
And he was running a factory where he'd been working since the 50s. So the culture was still a bit 50s, 60s, 70s-ish in those days. And all the managers were Mr. So-and-so. He didn't use first names and that kind of thing. However, he showed a great deal of confidence in me and promoted me very quickly because he saw something in me and was prepared to back me. And I think that, and he gave me a few very good lessons about perspective and not wanting to do everything in such a hurry, and looking at the perspective of the guy on the shop floor and why they may see the world differently than me as a fresh graduate coming in, having worked in a lab and then suddenly going onto a factory. So he was probably the best mentor I ever had.
And isn't that fascinating how you've carried that through into your leadership style? Because that's what you did with me when I worked with you. And also I can hear that's what you're doing with your team at the minute.
Yes, exactly.
So it's fascinating. So I remember, I don't know whether you remember this, you got me started into personal development. You handed me the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And you said, here you go, have a read of this. And I think it was because I was being a right negative Nancy. And I remember reading the book, and we were in Tenerife, and I read most of it. And I said, am I a bit negative? And you went, that's one of those questions that, oh my God, she's asked me a question that is very difficult to answer without naffing her off. But he basically said, yeah, you're a bit negative. So, and you shared lots of other books since. So what has been, and it doesn't just have to be a book actually. So what book, experience or course was career changing for you?
I think it was probably a course rather than a book.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of books within that helped me a lot, that were recommended reading, and that's when I did an MBA course at INSEAD, which is the business school in Fontainebleau in Paris. And it wasn't a full MBA, it was a sponsored general management program that the company I worked for at the time and a number of other companies wanted to give an MBA education to managers, or either senior managers that were taking over a division or up and coming young managers, but without taking them out of the business for a year or two to do an MBA. So it was done on a 2-week slots over a 2-year period. And that was fantastic. And the thing that was fantastic about it and really helped me a lot wasn't so much the course material, although that was very useful, but it was a number of different companies with different cultures. So 2 or 3 employees from each of those, but also multinational. So we were in an English speaking course with people from all over the world. So there were South Americans, there were Asians, there were Europeans, North Americans. So you had this whole melting pot of different ideas, looking at problems, business problems together and how they would solve it. And that taught me an awful lot, because it helped you see that, your little idea of the world and what was right didn't necessarily work if you were in Venezuela and looking at the same problem. And so it enabled you to share a lot of experiences in a non-risky way, because you were doing it over fictional business cases. But that helped me massively.
How did it help you?
It helped me to interact with people. A subsequent job I had after that, I was dealing with people in different countries a lot on business, either buying raw materials from different companies in different parts of the world, or selling to companies, particularly in countries like Japan and China in those days, which weren't as open as they are now. So learning how to deal with those cultures and see things from their ways was a massive inspiration. And it helped me forge really good relationships with people from all around the world and seeing different aspects of how people live. But the other nice thing that it also taught me was that for all those differences, most people around the world are just trying to do the same thing, which is to do the best for themselves and their families and have a decent life. And that is great. And if you treat people in that way, it can cut through a lot of prejudices, and you can just treat people as human beings. And I think that was one of the great lessons for me.
Cool, thank you. So, you know, you clearly get great results, that's obvious, because the results speak for themselves. So how do you optimize your own, so not your factory, how do you optimize your productivity, your performance?
I think for me, I do the same as I do with the factory, really, which is when you in these kind of positions, you get bombarded with all sorts of stuff. And we all get hundreds of emails offering this, that, and the other. There's courses, there's webinars, there's goodness knows what, hundreds and hundreds of them, and things to read. And you think, should I know about that? What I did probably in my 20s when I was starting out was, with a great thirst for knowledge, trying to understand everything and think, how do I apply that in my role and what have you. Now I've learned to be more judicious, and instead of just, as stuff comes in, thinking, oh, I'll have a look at that, I just get rid of it.
Yeah.
I don't look at it. I only look at it is if I've decided that there's a topic I need to know about, and then I'll go looking and see what's out there.
Yeah.
And that way you control it, you filter it and say, right, I'm interested at the moment, for example, in robotics, as we're looking at modernising our factory in the next few years. So if something comes up on robotics, I'll look at it, or I'll go looking for it. But if other stuff comes on, other topics, such as lean manufacturing, we're already doing that, and we're doing it to the right level for now.
Yeah.
So there might be some new developments, but it's not of interest to me at the moment. So
Yeah.
I'll just put it in the bin. I can always come back to it at the appropriate time. So it's filtration, it's focus, it's cutting out all the noise.
Yeah.
And then you don't get stressed, because you free up a lot of time or thinking time in your day by doing that.
No, absolutely. And I think that's massive, particularly, I mean, you don't do social media either, do you?
No,
and
I think,
apart from LinkedIn, yeah. Well. But I think what you've just said there is relevant for social media as well, because, you know, you're bombarded with all of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing about a study, and people actually find it much less stressful when there's less choice. So yeah, no, and that validates that. So I'm going to close things now. And my final question is, what do you put your success down to? Now, I had to add a little extra bit onto this sentence, because I knew what it'd say. I knew it'd say, well, it's down to luck. And I believe you make your own luck, Mr. Reed. So you're not allowed to say down to luck. So what do you put your success down to?
Understanding myself.
Yeah.
What's no. So knowing what I'm not good at, knowing what I'm good at, and then focusing on doing things that I enjoy and I'm good at.
Yeah.
And accepting that there might be other roles out there, other people doing jobs, they earn more money, they may even seem to have an easier life. But if it's not something I would enjoy doing, then I don't really grudge it, don't worry about it, don't think about it, just focus on what I'm good at, what I like to do. And with that, I know I'll do okay.
Yeah. You've done more than okay there, Chip, haven't you? Yes. Yeah, it's done very well, folks. Right. So thank you so much for listening. If any of the topics have piqued your interest, I do offer a free discovery session. So it's a 2-hour session with me, do it via Zoom. I will include a link below if you want to book that. Alternatively, if you're interested in optimizing your productivity, well-being, and life generally, then why don't you subscribe to my blog? You can do that. Again, I'll include a link below, but you can do that on my website, which is all the W's, B, spelt with 3 E's, b.company. Alternatively, you can connect with me on all the usual social media platforms. That's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, see all those distractions. And I also write on Medium as well. And you can find me at, so it's Estelle, E-S-T-E-L-L-E, the word at, A-T, and then B, spelled with 3 E's. Thank you for listening, and hopefully speak to you again soon. If you